Friday, January 11th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning I want to summarize a series of videos I've watched about World War I called World War I Conspiracy by the Corbett Report. And it's a great revisionist documentary about what was really behind World War I. And I think Corbett did a great job on that. In my opinion, it just proves that the last century has been a century of war and inflation in order to bring in one world government, a globalist new world order. And Corbett does a great job. Before that, of course, I'll look at the market, see what they're doing this morning. I also look at some of the headlines on Zero Hedge this morning. There's some interesting ones that are even related to this three-part series documentary by the Corbett Report. I'll, of course, put links to this documentary below in the description. It will be up in the cards as well of the YouTube videos. And before I start, I'd like to thank again for all the support to my channel, not only through viewership, but also through contributions through PayPal, through Patreon, through cryptocurrencies, through purchasing of Maneco 64 merchandise on the Teespring store. One of my favorites, of course, is the End of Fed mug. It says at Maneco 64 here. It says robbing Americans since 1913. Not only Americans, but the whole world. And here it says home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So thanks again. So this morning, 7:45 a.m. London time, let's look at what the markets are doing. So things are fairly interesting this morning in terms of the precious metals. Yesterday, of course, was a disappointing day for precious metals, especially silver. But this morning, I woke up and I saw gold up, which is surprising. I would have expected gold to continue to be down. Also silver. This is quite unusual what we're seeing this morning. And before I look at the prices, just wanted to note that the COT report for the futures, for precious metals futures, hasn't been published since the 18th of December. Usually there's a delay around Christmas, New Year, because of the holidays. But actually, I've just gone into the CFTC website and they say that because of the government shutdown, they're not publishing the data. So we haven't had data for almost a month. It'll be a month next week. And I'm not like trying to say there's any conspiracy there, but I mean, if the powers that be, the bullion banks and the central banks wanted to do something and not have people see it through the publishing of data, it would probably be the best time to do it. It would probably be when there's a government shutdown and the CFTC doesn't publish the data on the commitment of traders for futures, gold futures and silver futures. Just a thought. I don't know. I don't know what you think. Maybe you can comment below. So where are we this morning? Well, spot gold is at $1293.60. It's up $7, and it's up 0.5%. Silver is up 14 cents, almost 1% at $15.70. So before I go on to the other updates, let's have a look at the charts a little bit here. We've got, this is spot gold. As I said, I think yesterday, or the day before, I think we're consolidating here. We've had quite a big move, you have to admit, since the middle of December. It's almost been a straight line move up. So it's normal, I guess, even though it's frustrating that we consolidate here. It's almost like forming a flag and then, taking a rest, and then we could see another move higher. How long this consolidation will take is difficult to say, of course. Technical analysis is not perfect science, but it gives you an idea, right? What about the silver chart? Well, I like, at the moment, I'm keeping an eye on this long-term weekly chart. And as you can see, yesterday they were able to get the silver price below this trend line. But they're having a tough time. So it's looking good for silver, in my opinion. Okay, yeah, as I said, gold and silver are moving quite well, but the rest of the market is relatively quiet. The Dow is down 30 points, 23,966. S&P is down 5 points, 2590. So they're not doing much. Nasdaq 100 futures down 14, a 0.25%. Just a quick look at the Dow. Let's have a look here. I've done a little chart here. This is the futures, so it's open almost 24 hours. So some of these levels might be different than the index itself, but you can see here that retracement wise, we could go a little higher. We could go to around 24,200, which would be roughly the 50% retracement of the move we've had since October 3rd to the low on, yeah, it was Christmas Eve, December 24th. I personally think, yeah, we could go there. But as you can see, the trend definitely looks lower. It's going to be very hard to get back up to that 27,000, especially after we've had all the backtracking by the Federal Reserve. You know, Powell was turned into from a hawk to a dove. So that's the picture there for the stock market. Currencies, fairly quiet except for the dollar yuan, and we'll get to that in a minute. Cable is 127.50, unchanged. Euro 115.25. It is up about 0.25% though. And dollar yuan is almost unchanged, 108.33. The big move this morning has been a move lower in the dollar versus the Chinese yuan. We're at 675, down 0.6%. What could that mean? Well, there's news about the negotiations between Chinese officials and American officials, trade deals and stuff. One could say, I mean, I even said the other day that it could mean that the Chinese got what they are getting what they want, so they're letting their currency appreciate. Don't forget, this is not the yuan going down, it's the dollar going down. Or could it be also that the Chinese know something and they're rushing to get out of dollars and get into the precious metals? Who knows? I'd like to be, you know, a fly on the wall in these meetings, but I'm not. I'm just trying to, I'm only speculating, of course. So that's the big move this morning. You know, maybe that's why gold and silver are doing so well. I mean, the yuan is, the dollar's down 0.62 versus the yuan, and gold is up almost 0.6 here. So could be related. Crude oil remains fairly firm, relatively firm, considering we were down around 42.50. When was it? Just before Christmas, and now we're at trading at 53. So oil has rallied about $10 since then. 10-year yield, yes, it's rallied a little bit, which means bond prices have gone down in the last day or so. We got up to 275 yesterday. We'd been below 270 at the beginning of the week. We're now down 2 basis points at 273, the 10-year yield. So the century of war and inflation, and I've spoken about this quite a few times, different videos, you know, in the last, well, 3 years that I've been making these videos on YouTube. And I've talked about how with the outbreak of World War I, the warring factions, powers in Europe, dropped the gold standard. Why? Well, because it's difficult. to finance war under gold standard, because during war, governments have to spend more than usual, so it's easier to do it, suspend convertibility of the currency into sound money, and that's what they did. And basically, the U.S. didn't do that, of course. It stayed under a gold standard for another, I would say, 20 years, maybe a little less, to 1933. But and all these things at the time, they were, people were told that it was temporary. If you look back at the Napoleonic Wars, they suspended convertibility here in the UK, and it was temporary because they resumed convertibility at a few years after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. So I think most people expected that, but in the Corbett report, he doesn't necessarily talk about that, but he points out the real culprits behind World War One, and they're basically still around. Not the same people, of course, because they've passed on, but they're the people who've carried the torch for these people. And these people they're very easy to pin down, and not necessarily the power behind it, but the institutions that behind this. And they are the CFR in the US, Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House in the UK, which is the Royal Institute for Foreign Affairs, and groups like Bilderberg, the IMF, the BIS, the central banks. So he points out that it's the American banking establishment. I guess you could include some of the European banking establishment now. And it's a really great three-part series, and I really recommend it. It's called the World War One Conspiracy, and it's 3 parts. They're not very long, really interesting, and I highly recommend it. World War One affected many people, even me. How did it affect me? Being from Brazil, and I don't think Brazil was in World War One at all. If it did participate, it was a very nominal participation. Well, my great-grandfather on my father's side, he immigrated to Brazil in 1892 from Italy, and I think he was only around 20, 21. He was a young man. He immigrated with his brother, and by 1913, he had a family in Brazil. He had children, and he decided, he'd done fairly well in Brazil, and he decided to go take the family back to Italy. So they all went back to Italy. So they all went back to Naples. That's where he was from. But by 1914, later on in 1914, when the war kicked off, he decided to go back to Brazil. My grandfather at the time, I think he was about 17. So my great-grandfather didn't want his sons to go fight in this war. Do I think he was, unpatriotic? No, I think he did the right thing, especially when you watch the Corbett report. I never met my grandfather. He died before I was born, nor my great-grandfather for that matter. So, it would be great to talk to them to see what they thought about World War One. I even got a little, it's like a train pass from the Italian railways, Ferrovia dello Stato, the state railroads in Italy. And here it is. And it was issued to my great-grandfather. You can see it here, July 1914. So there you go. There he is. His name was Francesco Maneco. There you go. So he was planning to stay there in Italy. He bought this train pass for 5 years. from July 1914 to July 1919. But unfortunately, with World War I, all those plans were changed, and they went back to Brazil. So the most interesting thing about the Corbett report is that it shows how wars are used not only for profit, but to change mentality of the people. You know, ever since World War I in the West, government has become such an important part of life, the economic life, everything. And you can see that by how much government used to spend before World War I. Government spending was less than 10% in most Western countries. Now it's like 50%. So they've done really well. My hope is that we don't buy into these wars anymore. I think we've bought to some extent, I guess, onto the war on terror. That's the war we've had now. That's increased government spending. But another interesting thing from the Corbett report video is that in the run-up to World War I, boogeyman of that time were the Germans. You know, everything was blamed on the Germans. Even the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 was blamed on the Germans to some extent. So what does that remind you of today? Well, Russia, right? Blame everything on the Russians. And I said there's an article on Zero Hedge that is kind of related to this, as covert British military smear machine moving into the US. And I recommend you guys read this, and I'll put a link below. It's about this integrity initiative, which has been publicly proven to be financed by the British government. So there you go. Anglo-American sphere of influence still at work today, as it was over 100 years ago. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Make sure you also click on the little bell to get notified of my new videos. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. I wish you all a great day. I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.